So coming on to the next session. The session is to be delivered by Dr. Abbas Ustad. The title of the session is Disaster and Social Justice, and he is going to present a case study from Iran.
Thank you. First of all, I would like thanks from all of the colleagues in India, especially International Institute for Disaster for Health Management Research, and my friend Dr. Nidhi, that she invited me to this very valuable and informative seminar. My lecture is about the social justice in disaster. Why does it matter and why does it mean? I would like to introduce the first part of my PhD student, Laura Hamdanieh, and I would like to thank her to conduct this very, very important and very, very informative research. Let me next slide, please. As you know, during the history, the approaches to disaster risk management have been changed. If we want to divide the approaches of disaster risk management in two main parts, we can say that the COVID-19 pandemic conducted and very big revolution in the history of the disaster risk management. Why? Because in the pre-COVID-19 era, as we see in the history, the main approach and the first approach was fatalistic approaches. And then after a while, we see that the main approach for disaster risk management changed to enduring approach. And then in the recent year and recent decades, we can see the main approach and the main issues and the main challenges is about the social approaches. But in the post-COVID-19, we see that the health is so important. It means that right now in this decade, the health is the main and is the heart of the sustainable development and disaster risk management. Next slide, please. So I would like to mention about two main, term and phrase. We have some condition in each community that we name it social determinant of disasters. I'm sure that you know and you are informed about the social determinant of health. But right now, I would like to say about the social determinant of disasters. These items can cause an hazardous event to a big disaster or extensive or an intensive disaster. Every disaster, each disaster caused some impact, economic impact, natural impacts, social impacts, that we named is social impact of disaster. Next slide, please. As you see in this slide, when we want to categorize domain of disaster risk management, we can categorize all of the domains in 6 domains. The first domain is institutional domains. As you see in Iran, we conducted this study in 2015. As you see, the main item for disaster risk management in institutional domain, it is so important that the manager, the executive, the health worker, and all of the first responders have enough competency for disaster risk management. Not, I want to emphasize in the disaster risk management circle, not just about the responding. As well as economic issues such as income, employment, insurance are so important. Cultural, domain including literacy, disaster awareness, and wide world are so important. And concerning the social domain of disaster, I would like to explain more about the social domain or social determinant of disaster in the next slide. But we know that the physical issues are so important. The location of the disaster is so important. The space and the distribution of the location in a village, in a city, in a community are so important, as well as the environment, the water resources, the green resources are so important for us to conduct an effective disaster risk management and promote our community resilience. Next slide, please. So, we are talking about the social determinant of disaster. I'm sure that all of you know about the social determinant of disaster, but it is so important beside of the poverty, beside of the health, beside of the social capital, social security, employment, and social well-being. There is a very, very important issue as the social justice. Based on our studies that I will explain in the next slides, social justice in disaster is a missing and is a neglected issue concerning the disaster risk management. This is next slide, please. Okay, we are talking about the social justice in disaster. The question is, what does it mean? And what are the social justice disaster characteristics? What are social justice in disaster domain and determinant? And finally, we should identify the impact of social justice of disaster. In this lecture, I would like to, explain more about the definition, about the characteristic, about the domain, and about the impacts. Next slide, please. Laura Hamdani, as I introduced her, conducted a scoping review to find out which literature, which knowledge we have and is available in all of the world. We noticed that there isn't an accurate definition for social justice in disaster. The next issue that we find based on our studies was that an explicit definition of social justice was only mentioned in 2 studies. Most definitions were not related to disaster context. When we refer to the literature, we have a lot of literature about the social equity, social justice, but we need that to define and explain about the meaning and the definition of the social justice in disaster context. And social justice and equity, based on our study, we can explain that the definition of the social justice in disaster can define as equity in words. That is so important. The words should be distributed equity rights. That the other colleagues explain more about the equity in rights, equity in resource distribution, and consequences in all phases of disaster risk management. We should consider all of the phases of disaster risk management, not just response and preparedness and recovery. We should have an equal worth, equal rights, equal resource distribution, and equal consistency, even though in the prevention phase, in the mitigation phase, and other phases of disaster risk management. Next slide, please. As I said, this is the definition of social justice in disaster. Social justice is equity in source, rights, resource distribution, and consequences in all phases of disaster risk management in societies. Next slide, please. Concerning the determinant of social justice in disaster, as Dr. Needy explained at the beginning of this workshop, we should consider institutional domain. We should consider social, such as poverty, citizen partnership, trust, social capital, discrimination, and so on. Economic is so important, environment so important, physical, for example, infrastructures, structures, living, building codes, and etc., are so important. And as well as that is so important that we should consider cultural, issues such as education, such as awareness, and etc. Next slide, please. Based on our study, we conduct a conceptual framework for social justice in disaster. As you see, when we want to establish and conduct a conceptual framework, we should consider three main items. The first one is characteristics. I explained about the characteristics of social justice. You see in the middle of this slide, and the other is determinant, and the last one, or the third one, is impact of social justice in disaster. When we have a social justice disaster, the main impact are human dignity. One of the colleagues explained very, very well about the human dignity and the achievement of the discrimination, good governance, and it's so important, equity, sustainability, resilience, and finally the human rights, and considering the human rights is one of the most important impact of social justice in disaster. Next slide, please. In the second phase of this thesis, we conduct a qualitative study. I just want to, mention a very little space of this study concerning the social justice of the disaster definition. Based on our study, our qualitative study, social justice is equity in all domains. It means that we should consider equal economy, equal ethnic, environment, political, social, as well as resource distribution and equal opportunities. In the scoping review, we didn't see anything about the equal opportunities, but based on our qualitative study, we noticed that the equal opportunities is so important. And the next one is the different groups should be considered in the community in all phases of disaster risk management in the societies. Next slide, please. Okay. Based on our study, we noticed that we need to set a unified definition for social justice in disaster. I know that it might be different definition in the different community. Why? Because the social justice in disaster, essentially social justice and equity, is culture-bound. The issue is culture-bound term, and it is a culture-bound concept. But when we want to speak to each other and communicate with each other, we need to set a unified definition of social justice in disaster risk management. The second conclusion is that we need to develop a common conceptual framework for social justice in disaster. And the last one that is so important, we need to develop national plan for achieving social justice in disaster, or we need to develop some national plans adopted or related to the justice. Why? Because the justice is the final output of sustainable development, disaster risk management, and etc. Next slide, please. Again, I would like to thank to everyone. I hope everyone be happy, and thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Abbas, for the wonderful presentation, presenting the study and the outcomes. We really need to define social justice, how it has to be, quantified and qualified in terms of understanding for the last person standing on the pedestal, who has to be a recipient of equal care, equal rights, and equal humanitarian aid in the event of a disaster situation. So I completely agree with you. And when it comes to vulnerable population, it becomes even more difficult to ensure equity and equality.